The Montana frontier in the 1880s was a world carved from cold and silence, where the Morrison family's cabin stood as a fragile sanctuary against the relentless winter. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, blanketed in snow so deep and pure that every sound was muffled, every movement deliberate. The Morrison cabin, built from hand-hewn logs and chinked with moss and mud, was more than shelter. It was the sum of generations' wisdom, a testament to survival in a place where the elements showed no mercy. Inside, the air was sharp, tinged with wood smoke and the faint earthy scent of moss insulation. The walls, layered with quilts and oiled paper, bore the marks of countless winters. Each log had been selected for its strength, each crack sealed with care. The windows, small and thick with frost, let in only the palest morning light, casting long shadows across the plank floor. The Morrison family, Thomas, Sarah, their children Emma, John, William, Michael, and baby Catherine, lay bundled together in beds piled high with furs and patchwork blankets, their breath rising in tiny clouds. Thomas, the father, was always the first to stir. Years on the frontier had honed his senses. He could read the cold in the ache of his bones, the way the cabin creaked, the silence outside. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile warmth that clung to the beds. His feet met the icy boards, and he moved with practiced urgency to the cast-iron stove, the heart of their survival. The embers inside were precious. If they had died, the family would face a morning of desperate cold, risking frostbite or worse. Sarah, his wife, was already awake, her hands nimble as she reached for the candle and matches on the bedside table. The scratch of the match was loud in the hush, and the brief flare of light revealed her face, lined with fatigue but resolute. Together they coaxed the fire back to life, layering kindling with the precision of ritual. Each movement was deliberate, the placement of pine splinters, the gentle breath to stir the coals, the careful addition of larger sticks. The fire grew, its warmth creeping slowly into the room, promising another day. The children stirred as the cabin brightened. Emma, the eldest, wrapped herself in a shawl and checked the water bucket, finding it frozen solid. John, 12 and eager to help, dressed quickly, pulling on wool socks knitted by Sarah from the family's own sheep. He braced himself for the cold outside, tasked with gathering clean snow for water. The world beyond the cabin was both beautiful and deadly. Stars glittered in the black sky, and the snow squeaked under his boots as he worked quickly, fingers aching despite his mittens. Inside, Sarah prepared breakfast, rationing cornmeal and dried apples, her movements efficient and quiet. The younger children remained bundled together, their shared body heat a precious resource. Thomas selected oak logs for the morning fire, his choices guided by experience. Oak for steady heat, pine for quick flames, hickory reserved for the longest nights. The woodpile inside was a monument to months of labour, each log split and stacked with care. As the fire warmed the cabin, the Morrisons gathered around the stove, sharing warmth and quiet conversation. Their survival depended on more than just the fire. It was the result of knowledge passed down, of preparation and community. The cabin, humble and sturdy, was a fortress against the cold, a place where resilience was woven into every quilt, every log, every morning ritual. In the heart of winter, the Morrison family faced each day together, their story one of endurance, ingenuity, and hope. The Morrison family's survival on the Montana frontier was not a matter of luck, but of relentless resource management and ingenuity. Every item in their cabin, every scrap of food, Every stick of wood was counted, rationed, and repurposed with a precision born of necessity. As the blizzard raged outside, Thomas Morrison sat at the small kitchen table, his brow furrowed as he reviewed their dwindling supplies. The ledger he kept was not just a record, it was a lifeline, tracking every pound of cornmeal, every strip of dried venison, every handful of beans. Sarah, his wife, moved quietly through the cabin, her hands never idle. She checked the water bucket, now filled with melted snow, and set aside the last of the dried apples for the children's breakfast. She was the steward of their food, stretching meals with ingenuity. Cornmeal mush for breakfast, boiled beans for supper, and, on rare occasions, a bit of salt pork or bacon. Nothing was wasted. Potato peels became soup stock, bones were boiled for broth, and even the fat rendered from last autumn's butchering was saved for cooking and lamp oil. The children understood the importance of these routines. Emma, the eldest, helped her mother sort the root cellar, checking for spoilage and rotating the stores. John, at 12, was responsible for gathering clean snow each morning, careful to avoid the contaminated drifts near the cabin walls. William and Michael, the younger boys, helped by stacking kindling and feeding scraps to the chickens, whose eggs were a rare but welcome addition to their diet. Firewood was managed with equal care. The indoor woodpile was stacked by type and size, pine for starting fires, oak for steady heat, hickory reserved for the coldest nights. Each log was split and seasoned months in advance, and Thomas inspected them daily, choosing the driest pieces for the morning fire. When the supply ran low, he and John would brave the cold, hauling sleds to the distant woodlot, selecting trees with the practiced eye of men who understood that not all wood was created equal. Water, too, was precious. With the well-frozen solid, every drop had to be melted from snow, a process that consumed valuable firewood. Sarah rationed water for drinking, cooking, and the barest minimum of washing. The children learned to conserve, using only a cupful to wash their faces and hands and saving the rest for the day's needs. Clothing was layered and mended endlessly. Sarah's knitting needles clicked through the evenings, repairing socks and mittens, patching holes with scraps of wool salvaged from worn-out garments. The family's sheep provided the raw material, but every thread was precious. When a mitten wore thin, it was lined with rabbit fur, and old shirts were cut into strips for rags or quilt patches. Even stones had their place in the Morrison survival system. Fist-sized rocks, collected from the creek bed in summer, were heated near the stove and wrapped in cloth to warm the beds at night. The children would tuck them under their quilts, grateful for the gentle heat that lasted until morning. In the face of scarcity, the Morrisons' ingenuity shone. Sarah devised new recipes from whatever was left, sometimes mixing dried apples with cornmeal for a sweet mush, or stretching a handful of beans with wild herbs gathered in summer. Thomas repaired tools with bits of wire and leather, and when lamp oil ran low, he fashioned wicks from twisted cloth and used rendered fat for light. Every resource was managed with the understanding that failure meant more than discomfort. It meant danger. The family's survival depended on their ability to stretch supplies, improvise solutions, and work together. In the heart of winter, as the wind howled and the snow piled high, the Morrison cabin was a testament to the power of preparation, resourcefulness, and the quiet heroism of frontier life. The Morrison family's mornings on the Montana frontier were never ordinary. They were a daily test of skill, discipline, and inherited wisdom. As the first pale light crept through the frost-rimmed windows, the cabin was still gripped by the icy silence of night. The cold was not just a discomfort, it was a force that shaped every movement, every decision, and every ritual the family performed to survive. Thomas Morrison, the father, was always the first to rise, his body attuned to the subtle cues of the cabin and the world outside. He moved with a quiet urgency, careful not to disturb the fragile warmth that clung to the beds where Sarah, his wife, and their children, Emma, John, William, Michael, and baby Catherine, lay bundled together. The air inside was sharp, each breath visible in the dim light, and the only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards as Thomas crossed to the cast-iron stove. The fire was the heart of their survival. Thomas knelt before the stove, opening the heavy door with practiced caution. The hinges groaned, a reassuring sign that the metal had not cracked in the night's extreme cold. He peered inside, searching for the faint glow of embers. If the fire had died, the family would face a morning of desperate cold, risking frostbite or worse. Relief flickered across his face as he spotted a few glowing coals. "Still got some life," he murmured, signalling the start of the morning ritual. Sarah was already awake, her hands deft as she struck a match and lit a candle, the brief flare illuminating her determined face. Together they began the process of rekindling the fire, a sequence honed through years of trial and error. Thomas arranged bone-dry pine kindling, each splinter prepared weeks ago and kept near the stove for this exact moment. He built a careful structure over the embers, ensuring airflow and contact, then leaned close, breathing long, steady breaths to coax the coals back to life. The technique was precise, a skill more valuable than gold in the frontier winter. As the fire caught, Thomas added slightly larger sticks, constructing a miniature log cabin within the stove to maximize airflow. The flames grew, their warmth slowly spreading through the cabin. Emma, the eldest, emerged from her bedding, wrapped in a shawl, and checked the water bucket. Frozen solid, as expected. Sarah sighed, already planning to melt snow for the day's needs. The younger children remained huddled together, their shared body heat a precious resource. John, 12 and eager to help, dressed quickly, layering wool socks and pulling on mittens knitted by Sarah. He braced himself for the cold outside, tasked with gathering clean snow for water. The world beyond the cabin was both beautiful and deadly. Stars glittered in the black sky, and the snow squeaked under his boots as he worked quickly, fingers aching despite his layers. Inside, Sarah prepared breakfast, rationing cornmeal and dried apples, her movements efficient and quiet. The menu was simple but nourishing, designed to fuel the family for the day's labour. Thomas selected oak logs for the morning fire, his choices guided by experience. Oak for steady heat, pine for quick flames, hickory reserved for the longest nights. The woodpile inside was a monument to months of labour, each log split and stacked with care. As the fire warmed the cabin, the Morrisons gathered around the stove, sharing warmth and quiet conversation. Their survival depended on more than just the fire. It was the result of knowledge passed down, of preparation and community. The morning ritual was not just about comfort. It was the difference between life and death. Each movement, each decision, was part of a sophisticated system perfected through generations. In the heart of winter, the Morrison family faced each day together, their story one of endurance, ingenuity and hope, woven into every morning by the fire's glow. Resource management in the Morrison cabin was not a single act, but a living system, an intricate dance of calculation, improvisation, and tradition that unfolded every day, especially as the cold deepened and the blizzard's grip refused to loosen. After returning from their morning rounds, Thomas and John shook the snow from their boots and entered the cabin, the air inside now thick with the scent of melting snow, simmering cornmeal, and the faint tang of wood smoke. The warmth was hard won, and every degree was measured against the cost in wood, food, and effort. Sarah, the family's quiet strategist, was already at work. She moved between the stove and the small table, her hands deft as she portioned out the last of the dried apples for the children's breakfast. She kept a mental tally of every item in their stores, the dwindling sack of cornmeal, the precious jar of molasses, the strips of venison hanging in the lean-to, and the root cellar's hidden treasures, potatoes, onions, and a few wrinkled carrots. Nothing was wasted. Potato peels were saved for soup, bones boiled for broth, and even the rendered fat from last autumn's butchering was reserved for cooking and lamp oil. Emma, the eldest daughter, helped her mother sort through the root cellar, checking for spoilage and rotating the stores. She learned to spot the subtle signs, a soft spot on a potato, the sweet rot of an apple, the shriveled skin of a carrot that meant it must be used soon. John, still flushed from the cold, carried in the bucket of fresh snow, careful to avoid the drifts near the cabin walls where contamination was possible. William and Michael, the younger boys, stacked kindling and fed scraps to the chickens, whose eggs were a rare but welcome addition to their diet. Firewood was managed with equal care. The indoor woodpile was stacked by type and size, pine for starting fires, oak for steady heat, hickory reserved for the coldest nights. Each log was split and seasoned months in advance, and Thomas inspected them daily, choosing the driest pieces for the morning fire. When the supply ran low, he and John would brave the cold, hauling sleds to the distant woodlot, selecting trees with the practiced eye of men who understood that not all wood was created equal. Water, too, was precious. With the well-frozen solid, every drop had to be melted from snow, a process that consumed valuable firewood. Sarah rationed water for drinking, cooking, and the barest minimum of washing. The children learned to conserve, using only a cupful to wash their faces and hands and saving the rest for the day's needs. Clothing was layered and mended endlessly. Sarah's knitting needles clicked through the evenings, repairing socks and mittens, patching holes with scraps of wool salvaged from worn-out garments. The family's sheep provided the raw material, but every thread was precious. When a mitten wore thin, it was lined with rabbit fur, and old shirts were cut into strips for rags or quilt patches. Even stones had their place in the Morrison survival system. Fist-sized rocks collected from the creek bed in summer were heated near the stove and wrapped in cloth to warm the beds at night. The children would tuck them under their quilts, grateful for the gentle heat that lasted until morning. In the face of scarcity, the Morrisons' ingenuity shone. Sarah devised new recipes from whatever was left, sometimes mixing dried apples with cornmeal for a sweet mush, or stretching a handful of beans with wild herbs gathered in summer. Thomas repaired tools with bits of wire and leather, and when lamp oil ran low, he fashioned wicks from twisted cloth, and used rendered fat for light. Every resource was managed with the understanding that failure meant more than discomfort. It meant danger. The family's survival depended on their ability to stretch supplies, improvise solutions, and work together. In the heart of winter, as the wind howled and the snow piled high, the Morrison cabin was a testament to the power of preparation, resourcefulness, and the quiet heroism of frontier life. Insulation was the invisible shield that stood between the Morrison family and the deadly cold of the Montana frontier. After the exhausting morning of firewood gathering and emergency repairs, Thomas and John returned to the cabin, their cheeks stinging and their breath forming icy clouds in the air. The blizzard outside had not relented, and the temperature hovered near 40 below. Inside, the family's survival depended not just on the fire, but on the layers of protection they had built into every corner of their home. Sarah, ever vigilant, moved through the cabin with practiced eyes, checking the window coverings and feeling for drafts along the walls. She paused at the north window, where the recent repair had held firm, the new chinking of clay, animal hair, and ash forming a tight seal. She pressed her palm against the quilted covering, feeling only the faintest chill. "Good work," she murmured, nodding to Thomas, who was already inspecting the next vulnerable spot. The cabin itself was a marvel of frontier engineering. The double walls on the north and west sides, filled with bushels of dried moss, created a dead air space that trapped warmth. Every summer, the family had gathered moss from the shaded forest floor, stuffing it between the logs until the walls bulged slightly. The moss, combined with the clay chinking, formed a barrier that modern insulation could barely improve upon. Even the youngest children understood the importance of these systems, having spent countless hours helping to collect and pack the moss, their small hands learning the feel of survival. The roof was another masterpiece. Split logs formed the base, covered with layers of birch bark and more moss, then topped with sod cut from the prairie. The sod pressed everything together, making the roof airtight and adding another layer of insulation. During the worst storms, snow piled on the roof, acting as a free insulator, but Thomas was careful to clear ice dams near the chimney, knowing that a leak could spell disaster. Windows, the cabin's weakest points, received special attention. Each was covered first with oiled paper, a translucent barrier that let in light while blocking drafts. Over this, Sarah hung heavy quilts, and rags were stuffed into every gap around the frames. On the coldest nights, the family added an extra layer, old coats or blankets, anything to keep the warmth inside. The difference was palpable. Near the stove, the air was almost comfortable, while a few feet away the cold pressed in, held at bay only by these careful defences. The floor, raised off the ground and packed with pine boughs, was still the coldest part of the cabin. Thomas had built sleeping platforms 2 feet above the floor, and Sarah had lined them with old newspapers pasted to the logs, reflecting lamplight and adding another layer of warmth. The children's beds were arranged close together, maximizing shared body heat, and heated stones wrapped in cloth were tucked under the quilts each night. Even the arrangement of furniture was strategic. The baby's cradle was placed in the warmest spot, not too close to the stove, not too near the walls. The table, used for meals and lessons, was moved during the night to create a body heat shelter when temperatures dropped dangerously low. Every item in the cabin had a purpose, every placement a reason. As the blizzard howled outside, the Morrison family gathered near the stove, grateful for the invisible systems that kept them safe. The walls, roof, windows, and floor all were part of a sophisticated insulation network, refined through generations of trial and error. Sarah smiled as she watched her children play, their cheeks pink with warmth, and Thomas sat quietly, listening to the wind test their defences. The cabin was more than shelter. It was a fortress of knowledge, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience that defined frontier survival. And as night fell, the family slept soundly, wrapped in the layers of protection they had built with their own hands, trusting in the wisdom of those who had come before. The blizzard had passed, but the cold remained, settling over the valley like a heavy, silent blanket. In the Morrison cabin, the morning sun filtered through layers of oiled paper and quilts, illuminating the aftermath of survival. A family gathered, warm and safe, but already preparing for the next challenge. The fire in the stove burned steady, its heat a testament to the previous day's labour, but Thomas Morrison's mind was already on the woodpile. He knew that fire was not just warmth, it was life, and the science of firewood was as critical as any other frontier skill. After breakfast, Thomas called John to his side. "We need to replenish the kindling and split more logs," he said, his voice low but urgent. The indoor wood supply, carefully stacked by type and size, was dwindling faster than usual. The blizzard had forced them to burn more than planned, and the forecast, judged by the colour of the sky and the bite in the air, promised more cold ahead. Together, father and son dressed in layers, pulling on wool socks and mittens, faces smeared with bear grease to protect against the biting wind. The sled waited outside, its runners polished smooth by weeks of use. Thomas harnessed himself to the sled, and John carried the axes and saws, their blades sharp and handles oiled. The journey to the woodlot was silent, each step measured, breath freezing instantly in the morning air. The forest, a quarter-mile from the cabin, was both a refuge and a resource. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow. Thomas surveyed the stand with a practiced eye, searching for the right mix of species. Oak for steady heat, hickory for overnight, pine for kindling, he explained, pointing out each tree's unique qualities. Oak burned slow and hot, creating a bed of coals that lasted through the morning. Hickory, dense and rich, was reserved for the longest, coldest nights. Pine, with its resinous heart, caught fire quickly and was perfect for starting the day's first blaze. Selecting the right tree was an art. Thomas tapped trunks, checked for signs of rot, and judged the age and dryness by the bark and sound. "This oak's been dead 2 years," he said, marking it for felling. "Perfect for us. Seasoned but still strong." John watched and learned, absorbing the knowledge that would one day be his responsibility. The work began with the two-man saw, its teeth biting into the frozen wood. Long, steady strokes, not forced, just enough to let the blade do its work. The tree fell with a shuddering crash, sending a plume of snow into the air. Thomas and John bucked the trunk into stove-length sections, each piece measured precisely to fit the cabin's firebox. Splitting the rounds was another lesson, reading the grain, placing the wedge, striking with just enough force to open the wood without wasting energy. As they worked, Thomas shared stories of his own father, a legendary woodcutter who could process a cord a day even in his 60s. He understood wood, Thomas said, knew which trees to take, how to split along the grain, how to save effort. John listened, his muscles aching but his mind sharp, knowing that every lesson was a piece of their survival. By midday, the sled was loaded with oak, pine, and a few precious hickory logs. The return trip was slower, the weight substantial, but the promise of warmth made each step easier. Back at the cabin, the wood was stacked inside, each piece inspected for snow or ice, arranged by type and size. Pine for kindling, oak for steady heat, hickory for the night. Emma helped organize the pile and Sarah praised the careful selection. "This will last us through the next cold snap," she said, relief evident in her voice. The science of firewood, species, seasoning, splitting, stacking, was woven into the fabric of frontier life. It was not just about having enough wood. It was about having the right wood, prepared in the right way, ready for the right moment. As the day ended, the Morrison family gathered around the stove, the fire burning bright and steady. Outside, the cold pressed in, but inside the warmth was earned through knowledge, labour, and the quiet science of survival. The lessons of the woodlot passed from father to son ensured that the fire would burn through the longest nights, a beacon of hope against the relentless winter. The Morrison cabin was quiet as dusk settled, the golden glow of the stove casting long shadows across the walls. The day's labour, gathering and splitting wood, tending to chores, and fortifying the cabin's insulation, had left everyone weary but grateful for the warmth that now filled their home. Yet, on the frontier, comfort was always fragile. The family knew that even the best laid plans could unravel in an instant, and so they lived by a set of emergency protocols, honed through experience and necessity. That night, as the wind howled outside and the temperature dropped even lower, Thomas performed his final inspection. He checked the stove, ensuring the fire was banked with hickory and oak, designed to burn slow and steady through the night. He placed extra kindling and a small stack of pine within reach, just in case. Sarah laid out the emergency supplies: a tin of matches, a candle, a jar of bear grease for frostbite, and a small pouch of dried meat and apples. These items were kept together, ready to grab at a moment's notice. The children, already in bed, were bundled in layers of quilts and furs. Emma, the eldest, slept closest to the stove, ready to assist if needed. John, William, and Michael huddled together, their shared body heat a vital resource. Baby Catherine's cradle was positioned in the warmest spot, shielded from drafts by a wall of blankets. As midnight approached, the fire began to wane. Thomas, half awake, sensed the change in temperature, a subtle chill creeping across the floorboards. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and checked the stove. The embers glowed faintly, but the flames had died. He added pine kindling, coaxing the fire back to life with practiced hands. But the wood was damp from the previous day's blizzard, and the flames sputtered. Sarah joined him, her face tense. "If it goes out, we'll need to use the emergency wood," she whispered. Thomas nodded, already considering their options. The emergency wood was a last resort. Pieces of furniture, broken crates, anything that could burn hot and fast. He hesitated, knowing each item had value beyond fuel, but survival came first. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled the cabin, and the stove's draft reversed, choking the fire. Thomas acted quickly, opening the stove door and fanning the embers. Sarah handed him a strip of birch bark, its resinous surface perfect for reigniting stubborn coals. The flames caught, flickering to life, and relief washed over them both. But the ordeal was not over. The temperature inside had dropped enough to threaten frostbite. Sarah checked the children's extremities, rubbing bear grease into their cheeks and hands. She instructed Emma to move closer to the boys, maximizing their shared warmth. Thomas placed heated stones under the quilts, and Sarah wrapped baby Catherine in an extra layer of wool. The family's emergency protocol extended beyond fire and warmth. If the cabin became uninhabitable, they had a plan to retreat to the root cellar, where the earth's insulation offered protection from the worst cold. Supplies were stored there: blankets, food, and a lantern. The children knew the drill: move quickly, stay together, and wait for Thomas's signal. As dawn approached, the fire burned steady once more, and the cabin's temperature stabilized. The family had weathered another night, their emergency protocols tested but effective. Thomas and Sarah exchanged a tired smile, knowing that their vigilance and preparation had made the difference. On the frontier, survival was never guaranteed. It depended on knowledge, quick thinking, and the willingness to sacrifice comfort for safety. The Morrison family's emergency routines, born of hardship and refined through experience, were their shield against the unpredictable dangers of winter. As the sun rose, casting pale light across the snow, the family prepared for another day, grateful for the systems that kept them alive through the coldest nights. Layered clothing and the strategic use of body heat were as vital to the Morrison family's survival as fire and insulation. After the tense night of emergency protocols, the family awoke to a cabin still cold at the edges, but safe. The embers in the stove glowed, and Thomas was already feeding them with carefully chosen oak and hickory. Sarah, ever resourceful, began the morning routine by checking each child's hands and feet for signs of frostbite, rubbing bear grease into their skin, and inspecting their layers. The family's clothing system was a marvel of frontier ingenuity. Wool was prized above all. Sarah had spent countless evenings spinning yarn from their sheep, knitting socks, mittens, and scarves. Each child wore several layers: a cotton undershirt, a wool sweater, and a patched coat lined with rabbit fur. Pants were doubled, with woolen leggings underneath, and feet were wrapped in thick socks and moccasins. Even the youngest, baby Catherine, was swaddled in layers of wool and fur, her tiny hands tucked inside a muff Sarah had fashioned from scraps. On the coldest mornings, Sarah orchestrated a special ritual: the body heat shelter. She draped the largest quilt over the dining table, creating a tent-like enclosure. The children crawled underneath, bringing their bedding and heated stones. Thomas joined them, and together they formed a huddle, their combined warmth quickly raising the temperature inside the makeshift shelter. Sarah would read aloud or tell stories, her voice soothing and steady, while the family waited for the cabin to warm. Emma, the eldest, took responsibility for the younger children, ensuring they stayed close and shared blankets. She taught William and Michael how to tuck their hands under their arms and keep their feet together, maximizing heat retention. John, always eager to help, fetched more stones from near the stove, wrapping them in cloth and passing them around. The children giggled as the warmth seeped through their layers, grateful for the comfort in the midst of winter's chill. Sarah's knowledge of textiles was crucial. She knew that cotton, while comfortable, could be dangerous if damp, so she insisted on wool for outer layers. She patched holes with scraps from worn-out garments, lining mittens with rabbit fur and reinforcing socks with extra yarn. When supplies ran low, she improvised, using strips of old shirts as scarves and sewing together bits of fabric to make new quilts. The family's layering system extended to their sleeping arrangements. At night, they slept close together, sharing body heat beneath piles of quilts and furs. Heated stones were placed at their feet, and the children were arranged so that the youngest and most vulnerable were surrounded by older siblings. Thomas and Sarah took turns checking the stove, ensuring the fire never died completely. Even chores were adapted to preserve warmth. The children worked in pairs, taking turns outside to fetch water or wood, while the others stayed inside, maintaining the body heat shelter. Sarah encouraged movement, knowing that activity helped circulation and kept frostbite at bay. The Morrison family's mastery of layered clothing and body heat sheltering was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. These systems, refined through years of experience and necessity, allowed them to endure the harshest conditions. The cabin, fortified with insulation and warmed by fire, was made truly livable by the warmth they generated together, through shared effort, knowledge, and love. As the sun rose higher and the cabin grew warmer, the family emerged from their shelter ready to face another day. Their layered clothing and body heat rituals were more than survival strategies. They were acts of care and connection, binding the Morrisons together against the relentless cold. In the heart of winter, these simple, ingenious systems kept hope alive, proving that warmth was not just a matter of fire but of family. Community was the invisible lifeline that ran through the Morrison family's winter survival, binding them to their neighbours in ways as vital as fire and food. After a morning spent huddled together in their layered clothing and body heat shelter, the family emerged from their cabin, blinking in the pale sunlight that glinted off the snowdrifts. The cold was still fierce, but the promise of connection drew them outside. Thomas and John prepared for their daily rounds, packing a small satchel with emergency supplies, matches, bear grease, dried meat, and a length of rope. Sarah wrapped the children in extra layers, reminding Emma to keep William and Michael close. The family's first stop was the McClintock cabin, a quarter-mile away. The McClintocks were newcomers, unused to the brutal realities of a Montana winter. Their roof had sagged under the weight of snow, and their firewood pile was dangerously low. As the Morrisons approached, they saw Mrs. McClintock struggling to clear a path to the root cellar. Thomas greeted her warmly, offering advice on snow removal and insulation. He and John helped dig out the cellar door, showing the McClintocks how to bank snow against the cabin walls for extra warmth. Sarah checked on the children inside, sharing tips on layering clothing and rationing food. Emma played with the youngest McClintock, teaching her how to tuck her hands under her arms to keep warm. The next stop was Old Man Patterson's cabin, farther up the ridge. Patterson was a legend among the frontier families, his survival knowledge unmatched. The Morrisons found him splitting wood, his movements slow but deliberate. He welcomed their visit, eager to share stories and advice. Thomas listened as Patterson explained his method for keeping embers alive through the night, using a mix of oak and hickory, banked with ash to insulate the coals. John watched closely, absorbing every detail. Inside Patterson's cabin, Sarah and Emma admired his insulation system. Double walls packed with moss and mud, windows sealed with oiled paper and rags, and a roof layered with sod and birch bark. Patterson showed them his emergency kit, complete with homemade salves for frostbite and a stash of dried herbs for tea. The families exchanged recipes and techniques, each learning something new. On the way home, the Morrisons stopped at the communal gathering spot, a small clearing where neighbours sometimes met to share news and resources. Today, a few families had gathered, their faces red from the cold but animated with conversation. Thomas discussed firewood strategies, while Sarah traded root vegetables for eggs. The children played together, their laughter a rare sound in the winter silence. The sense of community extended beyond practical help. When a family fell ill or ran out of supplies, the others rallied, sharing what little they had. Stories and songs were passed around the circle, lifting spirits and reminding everyone that they were not alone. The Morrisons contributed their knowledge, but also received wisdom and comfort in return. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the family returned to their cabin, hearts warmed by the day's connections. The lessons learned and friendships strengthened were as essential as the fire burning in their stove. In the harsh isolation of the frontier, community was the glue that held families together, transforming survival from a solitary struggle into a shared triumph. That night, as the Morrisons settled in, Sarah reflected on the day. She knew that their survival depended not just on their own skills, but on the collective strength of their neighbours. The bonds of community, woven through acts of kindness, shared knowledge, and mutual aid, were the true foundation of life on the frontier. And as the wind howled outside, the Morrison family slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that they were part of something larger than themselves. The Morrison family's survival was shaped not only by their own ingenuity and the support of their neighbours, but also by the subtle interplay of gender roles and the transfer of knowledge across generations. After a day spent strengthening community bonds, the family returned to their cabin, where the evening routines revealed the quiet power and wisdom of the women who held the household together. Sarah Morrison was the heart of the cabin, her expertise woven into every aspect of daily life. As the family settled in for the night, she moved through the rooms with purpose, checking the fire, inspecting the children's clothing, and preparing a simple supper of beans and dried apples. Her hands were never idle. She mended socks by lamplight, patched quilts, and spun wool into yarn for future projects. The children watched her work, absorbing lessons that would one day be their own lifeline. Emma, the eldest daughter, was Sarah's apprentice. She learned to read the signs of spoilage in the root cellar, to stretch meals with wild herbs, and to manage the delicate balance of rationing food without sacrificing nutrition. Emma's responsibilities grew with each passing winter. She was trusted to care for her siblings, to tend the fire when Sarah was busy, and to help with the endless cycle of repairs. Her confidence grew as she mastered these skills, her sense of purpose rooted in the knowledge passed down from her mother. The boys too learned from Sarah, though their lessons were often more subtle. John watched as she treated frostbite with bear grease and warm cloths, her touch gentle but firm. William and Michael helped gather snow for water, learning to conserve every drop and to recognize the dangers of contaminated drifts. Sarah's teachings extended beyond practical skills. She instilled in her children a sense of responsibility, compassion, and resilience. Thomas, the father, respected Sarah's domain. He managed the heavy labour, splitting wood, repairing the cabin, and hunting when supplies ran low. But he deferred to Sarah's judgment in matters of health, food, and comfort. Their partnership was built on mutual respect, each understanding the value of the other's expertise. Thomas often recounted stories of his own mother, whose knowledge had saved their family during the harshest winters, reinforcing the importance of women's wisdom in frontier life. The transfer of knowledge was not limited to the Morrison household. During community gatherings, women shared recipes, medical remedies, and insulation techniques, while men exchanged tips on woodcutting and construction. The lines between roles blurred in times of crisis. Everyone contributed, and the best ideas were adopted regardless of origin. The children absorbed these lessons, their understanding deepened by the collective experience of the community. Sarah's influence extended beyond survival. She taught her children to find beauty in hardship, to appreciate the patterns in a well-knit sock, the warmth of a perfectly banked fire, and the comfort of a shared story on a cold night. Her rituals, singing while mending, telling tales as she cooked, created a sense of continuity and hope, binding the family together through the longest winters. As the night deepened and the wind rattled the windows, the Morrison family gathered around the stove, listening to Sarah's stories and Emma's laughter. The cabin was more than shelter. It was a living classroom, a place where knowledge was cherished and shared. The gendered roles of frontier life were not limitations, but sources of strength, ensuring that every member of the family was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the heart of winter, the wisdom of the women, passed from mother to daughter, shared with sons and neighbours, was the foundation of the Morrison family's resilience. Their story was one of partnership, learning, and the quiet heroism that defined life on the frontier. The Morrison cabin was more than a shelter. It was a living testament to frontier innovation, shaped by the hands and minds of those who understood that survival depended on engineering as much as endurance. After an evening spent sharing stories and wisdom, the family settled into their nightly routines, surrounded by the results of Thomas's ingenuity and the collective knowledge of generations. Thomas had built the cabin with a craftsman's eye and an engineer's mind. He often recounted the story of its construction to his children, hoping they would one day build their own homes with the same care. "A cabin isn't just logs and nails," he would say. "It's every lesson learned from winters past." The double wall design was his proudest achievement. On the north and west sides, where the wind struck hardest, he had built 2 layers of logs, leaving a gap filled with dried moss and straw. This dead air space trapped warmth, making the cabin far more comfortable than the single wall structures of less experienced settlers. The roof was another marvel. Thomas had split logs for the base, then layered birch bark and sod on top. The birch bark acted as a waterproof barrier, while the sod added insulation and weight, keeping the roof tight against the wind. In summer, the family had cut and stacked sod, letting it dry before laying it in overlapping rows. During winter storms, snow piled on the roof, adding yet another layer of insulation. Thomas taught John and the younger boys how to clear ice from the chimney and check for leaks, knowing that a single crack could let in enough cold to threaten their safety. Inside, the floor was raised 2 feet above the frozen ground, packed with pine boughs and lined with old newspapers pasted to the logs. The newspapers reflected lamplight and added a surprising amount of warmth. Sarah had collected them from neighbours and traders, turning what others saw as trash into a vital resource. The sleeping platforms, built by Thomas and John, were positioned away from the walls and stove, maximising warmth and minimising drafts. Windows were the cabin's weakest points, but Thomas and Sarah had devised a system to keep them secure. Each window was covered with oiled paper, then layered with quilts and rags. On the coldest nights, they added extra blankets or even old coats, sealing every gap. The family learned to check for frost and condensation, adjusting the coverings as needed to keep the interior dry and warm. Even the cabin's layout was strategic. The stove was placed near the centre, allowing heat to radiate evenly. The root cellar, dug beneath the cabin, was accessible through a trapdoor, making it possible to retrieve food without stepping outside. Thomas had lined the cellar walls with stone, using mud and straw as mortar, creating a space that stayed above freezing even in the worst cold. The Morrison family's home was filled with small innovations: hooks for drying clothes above the stove, racks for storing firewood indoors, and a system for collecting and melting snow for water. Sarah's kitchen was organised for efficiency, with shelves built into the walls and a table that could be moved to create a body heat shelter during emergencies. As the wind howled outside, the family slept soundly, protected by the engineering marvels that Thomas and Sarah had created. Their cabin was more than a refuge. It was a fortress of knowledge, a place where every detail mattered. The children grew up surrounded by lessons in construction, insulation, and resourcefulness, absorbing the wisdom that would one day keep their own families safe. In the heart of winter, the Morrison cabin stood as proof that survival was not just about enduring hardship, but about meeting it with creativity and skill. The legacy of frontier engineering lived on in every log, every stone, and every warm night spent together. Layered within the Morrison family's daily routines and the ingenious engineering of their cabin was a quieter, but equally vital struggle. The battle to maintain psychological resilience through the long, isolating winter. After another day spent reinforcing their home and sharing lessons, the family gathered in the warm glow of the stove, aware that survival meant more than just physical endurance. It required a steadfast spirit. The relentless cold and isolation could wear down even the strongest. Outside, the world was silent, the snow muffling every sound and the wind howling like a distant beast. The days were short, the nights endless, and the monotony threatened to sap hope. Thomas and Sarah understood this danger well. They had seen neighbours succumb to cabin fever, their tempers fraying, their energy waning, their sense of purpose lost in the white expanse. To combat this, the Morrisons cultivated rituals that nourished the mind and soul. After supper, Sarah would light the oil lamp and gather the children around the table, now transformed into a cosy shelter with quilts draped overhead. She would open the battered family Bible or a book of stories, her voice weaving tales of courage, adventure, and faith. Sometimes she sang old songs, her voice soft but clear, filling the cabin with warmth that no fire could provide. Emma, quick to sense when spirits were low, organized games for her siblings. She taught them riddles and word puzzles, using scraps of paper and charcoal to keep score. John, inspired by his father's stories, began carving small animals from leftover wood, gifting them to his brothers and sisters as tokens of hope. Even the youngest, Michael and William, contributed by inventing new ways to play with heated stones, or by helping Sarah with simple chores, their laughter echoing through the cabin. Thomas, though reserved, understood the importance of morale. He shared stories from his own childhood, tales of blizzards survived, of neighbours rescued, of clever solutions to impossible problems. He encouraged the children to ask questions, to imagine what they would do in his place, fostering a sense of agency and confidence. On especially dark nights, he would challenge the family to remember 3 things they were grateful for, turning their thoughts away from hardship and toward hope. Community gatherings, though rare in the depths of winter, were cherished opportunities to break the isolation. When weather permitted, the Morrisons would visit neighbours, sharing news, songs, and stories. These moments of connection reminded everyone that they were not alone, that their struggles were shared, and that together they could endure. Sarah also taught the children to find beauty in small things. A perfectly formed snowflake, the way sunlight danced on icicles, the intricate patterns in a knitted sock. She encouraged them to keep journals, recording their thoughts and dreams, preserving their sense of self against the monotony. Emma took this to heart, writing poems and sketches that she shared with the family, her creativity a beacon in the darkness. As the winter wore on, these rituals became lifelines. The cabin, fortified by engineering and resourcefulness, was also a sanctuary for the spirit. The Morrisons learned that resilience was not just about surviving the cold, but about nurturing hope, connection, and joy. Their story was one of endurance, not just of the body, but of the heart, a testament to the quiet strength that kept them warm through the longest nights. As the winter deepened and the days grew shorter, the Morrison family's routines shifted to accommodate the ever-present threat of isolation. Psychological resilience was vital, but so was the ability to respond swiftly to emergencies beyond the cabin walls. One evening, Thomas announced that the family would attend a community gathering at the old line shack, a mile across the frozen valley. The event was more than a social occasion. It was a chance to exchange news, share resources, and reinforce the bonds that kept the frontier families strong. Preparation for the journey was meticulous. Sarah packed an emergency kit with fire-starting materials, char cloth, birch bark, and a flint striker, alongside dried meat, apples, and a small tin of bear grease. She included extra woolen socks, mittens, and scarves for each child, knowing that exposure could be deadly. Emma and John helped gather heated stones, wrapping them in cloth to tuck inside their coats. Thomas reviewed the route, marking shelter points along the way. A stand of pines, a hollowed stump, and the abandoned trapper's lean-to. He handed each child a whistle, instructing them to use it if separated or lost in a whiteout. The family set out at dawn, the sky pale and brittle with cold. The snow was deep, but Thomas led the way, breaking a path with his boots and sled. Sarah kept the children close, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of weather change. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of distant pine and the promise of another storm. As they walked, Thomas taught the children to read the sky, the colour of the clouds, the direction of the wind, the subtle shift in temperature that signalled danger. Halfway to the line shack, the weather turned. A sudden gust whipped snow into the air, obscuring the path and chilling the family to the bone. Thomas called for everyone to stop, gathering them in a tight circle. He checked each child's face and hands for frostbite, rubbing bear grease into their skin and adjusting their layers. Sarah distributed the heated stones, pressing them into the children's coats and mittens. Emma blew her whistle, a sharp note that cut through the wind, signalling their location to any nearby travellers. With visibility dropping, Thomas made the decision to seek shelter in the abandoned trapper's lean-to. The family moved quickly, following the marked route and using the whistles to stay together. Inside the lean-to, Thomas and John cleared snow from the entrance and started a fire with char cloth and birch bark. Sarah arranged the children around the flames, layering quilts and coats to trap the heat. The family ate dried meat and apples, their spirits lifted by the warmth and the sense of safety. As the storm raged outside, the Morrisons took turns keeping watch and tending the fire. Thomas taught John how to bank the coals for a slow burn, while Sarah showed Emma how to ration food and water. The children played quietly, their laughter a comfort in the cramped shelter. When the storm finally passed, the family emerged, blinking in the pale sunlight, grateful for their preparation and the knowledge that had kept them safe. The journey to the line shack was completed without further incident. The community gathering was a celebration of survival. Families shared stories, exchanged supplies, and reinforced the emergency protocols that bound them together. Thomas and Sarah contributed their experiences, teaching others how to read the weather, prepare emergency kits, and find shelter in a crisis. That night, as the Morrisons returned to their cabin, they reflected on the importance of preparation, adaptability, and community. The frontier demanded more than endurance. It required foresight, quick thinking, and the willingness to help others. The family's emergency travel protocols, born of necessity and refined through experience, were a testament to their resilience and the strength of the bonds that kept them alive through the harshest winter. The Morrison family's journey to the line shack had reinforced the importance of preparation and community, but it also highlighted another essential frontier skill: the ability to read the weather and make life or death decisions based on subtle signs. As the family settled back into their cabin after the gathering, Thomas found himself reflecting on the storm that had nearly stranded them. He knew that survival depended not only on strength and resources, but on a deep understanding of the land and its moods. The next morning, Thomas rose early, his mind troubled by the memory of the sudden whiteout. He stepped outside, the air crisp and still, and scanned the horizon. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with high, thin clouds, a sign, he knew, of changing weather. He knelt and pressed his hand into the snow, feeling its texture and temperature. The snow was dry and powdery, but beneath it, a layer of ice had formed overnight. Thomas frowned, recalling his father's warning. Ice under powder means a thaw is coming, then another freeze. Watch for it. Inside, Sarah prepared breakfast, her movements calm but purposeful. She trusted Thomas's instincts, knowing that his ability to read the weather had saved them more than once. As the children ate, Thomas explained what he had seen. "We may have another storm soon," he said. "We'll need to check the roof, bank more snow against the walls, and make sure the woodpile is covered." Emma and John listened closely, eager to learn the skills that would one day be theirs to use. Thomas showed them how to watch the birds. If the chickadees clustered near the cabin, it meant the cold would deepen. If the crows flew high and fast, a storm was coming. He taught them to feel the wind, to smell the air for hints of moisture or the sharp tang of frost. Throughout the day, Thomas kept a careful watch on the sky. He noted the way the clouds thickened and lowered, the sudden hush in the forest, and the way the dogs grew restless. He explained to Sarah that the wind had shifted, coming from the north, a sure sign of snow. Together they prepared the cabin, sealing windows and doors, stacking extra wood inside and laying out emergency supplies. As evening fell, the storm arrived just as Thomas had predicted. The wind howled, rattling the shutters and driving snow against the walls. The family gathered in the center of the cabin, grateful for their preparations and Thomas's foresight. Sarah praised his skill, reminding the children that knowledge was as important as strength. During the storm, Thomas continued to teach. He showed the children how to listen for changes in the wind, how to judge the snowfall by the sound of the roof, and how to use simple tools, a stick, a bowl of water, a lantern, to measure temperature and humidity. Emma kept a journal, recording Thomas's observations and her own, determined to preserve the knowledge for future winters. When the storm finally passed, the Morrison cabin stood firm, its walls and roof intact, its family safe and warm. The children understood that their survival had depended on more than luck. It was the result of careful observation, experience, and the wisdom passed down through generations. In the days that followed, Thomas continued to teach, sharing stories of past winters and the lessons learned from each. The family grew more confident, their bond strengthened by the shared responsibility of reading the land and making decisions together. The Morrison story became one not just of endurance but of mastery, of knowing when to act, when to wait, and how to trust the subtle signs that nature offered. On the frontier, the ability to read the weather was a gift, a skill that turned uncertainty into opportunity and danger into safety. For the Morrisons, it was another thread in the tapestry of survival, woven with care and passed from parent to child, ensuring that their legacy would endure through every storm. Layered with the wisdom of weather reading and the rituals of preparation, the Morrison family's resilience was tested yet again when a sudden storm forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned line shack. The day had begun with promise. Thomas had read the sky, and though he'd warned of possible snow, the family felt confident in their ability to handle whatever came. They set out to visit neighbours, carrying emergency kits and dressed in their warmest layers, the children's laughter echoing across the frozen landscape. But as they crossed the valley, the wind shifted abruptly. The sky darkened and snow began to fall in thick, blinding sheets. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the world shrank to the sound of their own breathing and the crunch of boots on ice. Thomas called the family together, his voice steady but urgent. "We need shelter, now," he said, scanning the horizon for landmarks. Emma remembered the old line shack, a relic from the days when cattlemen roamed the valley. It was half buried in snow, but its roof was intact and the door still swung on its hinges. The family hurried inside, grateful for the refuge. The shack was cold and dark, its corners filled with drifted snow and the remnants of old tools. But it was shelter, and that was enough. Thomas and John set to work immediately. They cleared snow from the entrance and checked the structure for leaks. Sarah unpacked the emergency kit, laying out matches, birch bark and char cloth. The stove in the corner was rusty but usable. Thomas cleaned out the ash and built a fire, coaxing flames from the precious kindling. The warmth was slow to spread, but every degree mattered. Sarah organized the children, layering them with extra quilts and positioning them close to the stove. She checked their hands and feet for frostbite, rubbing bear grease into their skin and encouraging them to move and wiggle their toes. Emma helped distribute heated stones, wrapping them in cloth and tucking them under blankets. The family settled into a routine, taking turns tending the fire and keeping watch for signs of worsening weather. As the storm raged outside, Thomas taught John how to bank the coals for a slow, steady burn. He explained the importance of airflow, showing him how to adjust the stove's damper and add wood in careful increments. Sarah rationed food and water, stretching their supplies with ingenuity. Dried meat and apples, a handful of beans and melted snow for drinking. The hours passed slowly, marked by the rhythm of chores and the comfort of shared stories. Sarah sang old songs, her voice rising above the wind, and Emma led the children in games and riddles. Thomas recounted tales of past winters, reminding everyone that hardship could be endured with patience and skill. When the storm finally subsided, the family emerged from the shack, blinking in the pale sunlight. The world was transformed, drifts piled high, trees coated in ice, and the valley silent except for the distant call of a crow. The Morrisons returned home, grateful for the shelter and the knowledge that had kept them safe. The ordeal in the line shack became another chapter in their story, a testament to the power of preparation, adaptability, and the quiet heroism of frontier life. The family's ability to transform a cold, abandoned building into a sanctuary was proof that survival depended not just on strength, but on the wisdom passed down through generations. In the heart of winter, the Morrisons faced every challenge together, their bond strengthened by each trial. their legacy growing with every storm endured. Layered with the lessons of sheltering in the line shack, the Morrison family's next challenge was medical and safety knowledge. Skills that could mean the difference between life and death in the relentless cold. After their ordeal in the storm, the family returned home, grateful but exhausted. The experience had left its mark. John's cheeks were tinged with white, and William complained of numb fingers. Sarah's eyes narrowed with concern. She knew that frostbite and hypothermia were dangers that could not be ignored. Sarah sprang into action, her years of frontier experience guiding her hands. She ushered the children to the stove, stripping off their outer layers and inspecting their skin for signs of damage. John's cheeks and William's fingers showed the telltale waxy pallor of early frostbite. Sarah warmed bear grease over the fire, gently massaging it into the affected areas. She cautioned the children to move their fingers and toes, encouraging blood flow without rubbing too hard, which could worsen the injury. Thomas filled a basin with lukewarm water, careful not to make it too hot. He remembered his own mother's warning. Never use heat on frozen skin. Warm slow, or you'll do more harm than good. Sarah dipped cloths into the water, wrapping them around William's hands and John's face, monitoring their colour and sensation. She kept the children awake and alert, watching for signs of confusion or shivering that might indicate hypothermia. Emma helped by preparing a simple broth, adding dried herbs Sarah had gathered in summer. The warm liquid helped raise the children's core temperature, and Sarah encouraged small sips, knowing that hydration was as important as warmth. She checked their pulses and breathing, her calm presence reassuring everyone. The family's medical kit was a patchwork of homemade remedies and hard-won knowledge. Sarah kept jars of bear grease and tallow for skin protection, bundles of dried yarrow and willow bark for pain and fever, and a small tin of honey for wounds. She taught Emma how to recognize the stages of frostbite and hypothermia, explaining the importance of gradual warming and the dangers of rapid temperature changes. Thomas, meanwhile, inspected the cabin for safety hazards. He checked the stove for leaks, ensured the chimney was clear, and moved flammable items away from the fire. He reminded the children to keep a safe distance from the stove, especially when drying wet clothes. The family reviewed their emergency protocols, practicing what to do if someone collapsed or if the fire went out unexpectedly. The ordeal brought the Morrisons closer together. Sarah's medical knowledge, passed down from her mother and refined through years of experience, became a source of comfort and security. Emma absorbed every lesson, determined to carry the skills forward. John and William, once frightened, grew more confident as their symptoms faded, grateful for the care and attention. As the days passed, the family recovered. The children's skin healed, and their spirits lifted. Sarah continued to teach, showing the children how to make salves from animal fat and herbs, how to recognize the signs of illness, and how to respond calmly in a crisis. Thomas reinforced safety routines, ensuring that every member of the family knew how to tend the fire, handle tools, and respond to emergencies. The Morrison family's mastery of medical and safety knowledge was a testament to their resilience. In the heart of winter, surrounded by danger and isolation, they relied on each other and the wisdom of generations. Their story was one of care, vigilance, and the quiet heroism that defined frontier life. With every challenge, they grew stronger, their bond deepened by the trials they faced together. The Morrison family's mastery of medical and safety knowledge was not only a testament to their resilience, but also a reflection of the social systems and ethics that bound their frontier community together. After the ordeal with frostbite and hypothermia, Sarah and Thomas knew that their survival depended on more than just their own skills. It required the support, wisdom, and generosity of their neighbours. As the cold deepened, the Morrisons prepared for the weekly community gathering at the Patterson homestead, a tradition that had become a lifeline for every family in the valley. The journey was short but challenging, with snowdrifts and biting wind threatening to isolate each cabin. Thomas loaded the sled with extra firewood and a bundle of dried herbs, while Sarah packed jars of bear grease and a small tin of honey, gifts for those who might need them. Emma and John carried baskets of root vegetables and a few precious eggs, the result of careful rationing and the family's diligent care of their chickens. William and Michael, bundled in layers, clung to their parents, excited for the chance to see friends and share stories. The trek to the Patterson homestead was slow, but the promise of warmth and camaraderie kept their spirits high. Inside the Patterson cabin, the air was thick with the scent of stew and wood smoke. Neighbours gathered around the central stove, exchanging news and advice. The atmosphere was one of mutual respect and quiet gratitude. Each family understood that their survival was intertwined with the well-being of others. Sarah immediately joined the circle of women, sharing her remedies for frostbite and discussing the best ways to insulate windows with moss and mud. She listened as Mrs. McClintock described her struggles with a sick child, offering a jar of honey and a bundle of dried yarrow in exchange for a handful of beans. Thomas joined the men by the woodpile, discussing firewood strategies and the dangers of chimney fires. He traded oak logs for a length of sturdy rope, knowing that every resource had value and that generosity would be repaid in kind. The children played together, their laughter echoing through the cabin, a reminder that hope and joy could flourish even in the harshest conditions. The gathering was more than an exchange of goods. It was a forum for sharing knowledge and reinforcing the ethics of mutual aid. When the Patterson family revealed that their root cellar had flooded, neighbours volunteered to help dig a new drainage trench, offering tools and labour without hesitation. Stories of past winters were retold, each tale carrying a lesson in ingenuity, compassion, or caution. Sarah and Thomas reflected on the delicate balance between helping others and ensuring their own family's survival. They knew that generosity must be tempered with prudence, but they also understood that isolation was a greater danger than scarcity. The community's unwritten code: share what you can, ask for help when needed, and repay kindness with kindness, was the true foundation of frontier life. As the gathering ended and the Morrisons returned home, their sled lighter but their hearts full, Sarah smiled at her children. "We're stronger together," she said, her voice gentle but firm. The lessons of the day, mutual aid, knowledge sharing, and ethical decision-making were woven into the fabric of their lives. That night, as the wind howled outside and the family huddled by the stove, the Morrison cabin was filled not just with warmth, but with the quiet strength of community. Their story was no longer just about survival. It was about the bonds that made survival possible, the ethics that guided every choice, and the hope that grew with every act of kindness. In the heart of winter, the Morrisons faced each challenge with the knowledge that they were never truly alone. Layered with the ethics of mutual aid and the strength of community, the Morrison family's survival was also defined by their ability to adapt and remain flexible in the face of constant change. After returning from the Patterson homestead, the family found themselves confronted by a new challenge. A sudden thaw followed by a deep freeze, which threatened their food stores and the integrity of their cabin. Sarah noticed it first. The root cellar, usually a safe haven for potatoes and carrots, was damp and cold, the earthen walls slick with moisture. She called Thomas, who inspected the damage, and realized that the drainage trench, dug only weeks before, was now clogged with ice. The family sprang into action, adapting their routines to address the crisis. Thomas and John bundled up and worked outside, chipping away at the frozen earth and clearing the trench so meltwater could escape. Emma and Sarah sorted through the root cellar, salvaging what they could and moving vulnerable vegetables to a makeshift storage area near the stove. Inside, the family adjusted their sleeping arrangements. The cold had seeped into the floorboards, so Sarah moved the children's beds closer together, layering extra quilts and heated stones beneath them. She taught Emma how to sew emergency patches into the bedding, using scraps of wool and fur to reinforce weak spots. William and Michael helped by gathering pine boughs to insulate the windows and doors, their small hands learning the value of quick thinking and teamwork. Food rationing became more precise. Sarah devised new recipes to stretch their supplies, combining dried apples with beans and wild herbs to create nourishing stews. She encouraged the children to forage for edible roots and berries near the cabin, teaching them to identify safe plants even in winter. Thomas repaired tools with bits of wire and leather, improvising solutions when supplies ran low. The family's flexibility extended to their daily chores. When the woodpile dwindled, Thomas and John ventured farther into the forest, seeking fallen branches and dead trees that could be split and dried quickly. They adapted their fire management techniques, using smaller, hotter fires during the day and banking coals for longer burns at night. Sarah monitored the stove, adjusting the damper and airflow to maximize efficiency. Community support remained vital. When the McClintock family's roof began to leak, Thomas and John joined neighbors to patch it with sod and moss, sharing tools and expertise. Sarah traded dried herbs for eggs, and Emma helped care for a sick child, her growing medical knowledge proving invaluable. The Morrisons learned to balance their own needs with those of the community, adapting their routines to ensure everyone's survival. Even moments of leisure were shaped by flexibility. On stormy days, Sarah organized indoor games and storytelling sessions, encouraging creativity and laughter. Emma wrote poems and sketched scenes from their daily life, capturing the spirit of adaptation that defined their winter. The children invented new ways to play with heated stones and scraps of cloth, their imaginations transforming hardship into adventure. As the winter wore on, the Morrison family's ability to adapt became their greatest strength. They faced each new challenge with ingenuity, resourcefulness, and a willingness to change course when needed. Their story was one of resilience, not just in enduring hardship, but in embracing the uncertainty of frontier life. Through flexibility and preparedness, the Morrisons turned obstacles into opportunities, ensuring that their legacy would endure through every storm and every season. Generational wisdom was the Morrison family's most enduring inheritance, woven into every act of survival and adaptation. After the thaw and freeze had tested their flexibility, the family gathered around the stove one evening, the air thick with the scent of pine and simmering stew. The children, tired from a day of repairs and chores, settled in close as Thomas began to share stories from his own childhood. Tales of winters survived, mistakes made, and lessons learned. Thomas's father, a stoic man with hands roughened by decades of labor, had taught him the art of reading the land. "Listen to the wind," he would say, "and watch the animals. They know what's coming before we do." Thomas recounted how, as a boy, he had once ignored his father's warning about an approaching storm, venturing too far from home. The blizzard had come swiftly, and only his father's quick thinking, using landmarks and animal tracks, had led them safely back to their cabin. That lesson, burned into Thomas's memory, was now passed to John and William, who listened with wide eyes, understanding that survival was not just about strength, but about humility and respect for nature's signals. Sarah, too, shared her mother's wisdom. She taught Emma and the boys how to preserve food, mend clothing, and treat illness with herbs and animal fat. Her mother's voice echoed in her own. "Waste nothing. Every scrap has a purpose." Sarah demonstrated how to patch a quilt with mismatched fabric, turning necessity into beauty. She explained the importance of community, recalling how neighbours had once saved her family during a famine by sharing a hidden stash of potatoes. Emma absorbed these lessons, her hands growing deft and her mind keen, knowing that one day she would be the keeper of such knowledge. The children were encouraged to ask questions, to experiment, and to learn from their mistakes. When Michael tried to build a miniature shelter from sticks and moss, Thomas praised his effort and gently corrected his technique, showing him how to layer materials for insulation. William, curious about firewood, learned to identify different types of wood by smell and texture, understanding which burned hottest and which lasted longest. These small acts of teaching and learning were the threads that bound the family's legacy together. Even the family's rituals were shaped by generational wisdom. Each evening before bed, Sarah led the children in a quiet moment of gratitude, reflecting on the day's successes and failures. Thomas recited old proverbs, and Emma wrote in her journal, recording the events and lessons for future winters. The cabin walls, lined with patched quilts and handmade tools, were a living archive of the family's history. Community gatherings reinforced this cycle of knowledge. At each meeting, elders shared stories and techniques, while younger families listened and adapted. The Morrisons contributed their own innovations: Emma's method for layering quilts, John's trick for starting fires with damp wood, while learning new skills from neighbours. The exchange was never one-sided. It was a living tradition, evolving with each season. As winter wore on, the Morrison family's survival was less a matter of luck, and more a testament to the accumulated wisdom of those who came before. Their story was not just about enduring hardship, but about honouring the lessons of the past, adapting them to the present, and preparing the next generation for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the heart of the frontier, generational wisdom was their greatest strength, a legacy of knowledge, resilience, and hope that would carry them through the longest nights and into the promise of spring. The Morrison family's winter saga was drawing to a close, but the lessons of survival, adaptation, and generational wisdom lingered in every corner of their cabin. As the days grew longer and the snow began to melt, Thomas and Sarah found themselves reflecting on the contrast between their hard-won knowledge and the comforts of the modern world. The children too sensed the change in season, their spirits lifting with the promise of spring, yet their minds still shaped by the trials they had endured. One evening, as the family gathered around the stove for what might be the last time that winter, Thomas spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "We've come through another season," he said, "not just because of our strength, but because of what we know and what we share." He looked at his children. each one changed by the months of cold, scarcity, and challenge. John and William had grown into capable young men. Emma's hands were skilled and confident, and even little Michael and Catherine understood the rhythms of survival. Sarah added her own reflection, recalling the first winter she had spent on the frontier. "I remember how lost I felt," she admitted, "until the neighbours came, sharing their stories and their food. It was their knowledge that saved us, just as ours has helped others." She smiled at Emma, who had become her apprentice in every sense, and at John, who now split wood with the precision of his father. The family's rituals continued, even as the cold receded. Emma wrote in her journal, recording the events of the winter and the lessons learned. Sarah patched quilts and prepared the last of the root cellar's stores, teaching the children to waste nothing. Thomas inspected the cabin, planning repairs and improvements for the next year. The children played outside, their laughter echoing across the thawing landscape, but always returning to the warmth and safety of home. As the snow melted, the Morrisons welcomed neighbours for a final gathering. The community came together, sharing stories of hardship and triumph, exchanging seeds for spring planting, and celebrating the resilience that had carried them through. Elders recounted tales of winters past, while the younger generation listened, eager to inherit the wisdom that had sustained their families. The bonds of mutual aid and shared knowledge were stronger than ever, woven into the fabric of daily life. Thomas found himself thinking about the world beyond the frontier, the modern comforts that most people took for granted. He wondered how many had lost touch with the skills and systems that had kept his family alive. "There's something deeply satisfying," he mused, "about knowing you can endure, that you possess the knowledge to survive when everything else fails." Sarah agreed, her eyes shining with pride. "We're connected to those who came before us, and to each other. That's what keeps us warm through the longest nights." As spring arrived, the Morrison family looked to the future with quiet confidence. Their story was not just one of endurance, but of connection to the land, to their ancestors, and to their community. The knowledge they had gained and shared was their true legacy, a source of strength that would guide them through every season. In the heart of the frontier, the Morrisons understood that survival was more than a matter of fire and food. It was a tapestry of wisdom, preparation, and community, a legacy that modern comforts could never replace. And as the world outside thawed and bloomed, the family carried forward the quiet confidence of those who knew how to stay alive in conditions most would find unimaginable, forever bound by the resilience and ingenuity of their ancestors.